traveling through the Finger Lakes in an open coach pulled by horses down dirt roads in temperatures in the upper 80s. He was dressed in a dress jacket over a long-sleeved shirt, as was the proper fashion of the time. Who was this person? When did this happen? Why did throngs of people turn out to greet him when he arrived in their towns? He was General Lafayette, who was made an honorary citizen of the United States and was considered by people of the United States as the most famous Frenchman of all times, certainly of the first 100 years of the United States. This visit by General Lafayette through the Finger Lakes on June 8, 1825, is the topic of this program in the Our Finger Lakes History Series. I am Seneca County historian Walter Gable, and I welcome you to this program. I want to begin by covering some biographical information about Lafayette. He was born into nobility and became known as the Marquis de Lafayette. Late in his life, he resigned his nobility. Here in the United States, he had properly come to be referred to as General Lafayette because he rose to a rank of general during our Revolutionary War. Lafayette was born in 1757 and had a lengthy formal name, Marie Joseph Paul Yves Roche Gilbert du Motier. Before he was 2, his father died in battle in the 7 Years' War. Then at age 12, his mother and grandfather died, leaving him a wealthy young orphan with the title of Marquis. Following in his father's footsteps, he entered the army. At the age of 16, he married Marie de Noailles of a wealthy noble family. On August 8, 1775, he heard the Duke of Gloucester speak sympathetically of the rebellious American colonies against Britain. Lafayette was so moved by what he heard that he made secret plans to leave France and go help the American colonies fight England. Lafayette will later be arrested by the French king for having illegally left France to do this. Marquis de Lafayette arrived in Charleston, South Carolina, June 13, 1777, at the age of 19. He journeyed to Philadelphia and there met General George Washington. He was wounded at the Battle of the Brandywine in the Philadelphia area on September 11, 1777. He camped with General Washington's troops at Valley Forge that awful winter of 1777-78. The American Congress put him in charge of a planned invasion of Canada, but Lafayette ended it. In February of 1779, he returned to France to lobby the French king for still more support for the American forces. Returning to the United States, he was in command of troops that helped block British Lord Cornwallis from escaping with his troops by land from Yorktown in 1781. After the fighting in the American Revolution ended, Lafayette went back to France, where he was received as a hero. In 1784, he came back to the United States to visit his great friend, George Washington. Then he returned to France and was appointed to the Assembly of Notables, but was unsuccessful in getting members of the nobility to have delegates in the upcoming Estates General vote by head or each person, rather than one vote per estate, nobility, clergy, and all the rest of the people. He was commander-in-chief of the Parisian National Guard at the time of the storming of the Bastille prison on July 14th, 1789, in what becomes known as the French Revolution. He designed a new French flag consisting of the colors of red, blue, and white. Unfortunately, as the French Revolution turned more radical, Lafayette suffered a loss of popularity and was imprisoned. When Napoleon rose to power, Lafayette's French citizenship was restored to him. But true to his beliefs in democracy, Lafayette opposed Napoleon's further power plays. Then in 1814, after the defeat of Napoleon and with the Bourbon Restoration, Lafayette returned home to Paris and served for many years in the Chamber of Deputies. When he was defeated for another term in the Chamber of Deputies in 1823, he was fortunately in 1824 to receive from President James Monroe and the United States Congress an invitation. Lafayette was invited to visit the United States to help drum up support for the upcoming 50th anniversary of the United States. Lafayette crossed the Atlantic Ocean, arrived in New York City on August 15th, 1824, accompanied by his son, Georges Washington Lafayette, and by his secretary, Auguste Levasseur. Lafayette was in his later 60s at the time. Lafayette was to visit all 24 of the states that then made up the United States. Look at the map at the lower right, and you'll note the states are shown in pink, in contrast to the other parts that will later become part of the United States. In early June 1825, Lafayette was nearing Buffalo, New York from Ohio and Pennsylvania. The plan, once in New York, was for him to travel from Buffalo on all portions of the nearly completed Erie Canal all the way to Albany. He needed to be in Boston by June 17th so that he could help dedicate the new Battle of Bunker Hill monument. But Lafayette changed his plans in Buffalo because he received a letter from James Reese of Geneva, New York. Lafayette had met James Reese in Philadelphia because Reese was the clerk to Robert Morris. Robert Morris was known as the financier of the Revolution, the American statesman who gave so much personal money to help finance the Americans' military forces. Lafayette decided that from Rochester to Syracuse, Lafayette and his entourage travel party would travel by land so that he could go to Geneva. Lafayette was in Rochester on June 7th. In Rochester, Lafayette met with a group of Revolutionary War veterans at Sylvius Hord's Tavern. That tavern no longer stands, but the present building at the corner of Exchange Boulevard and West Main Street does have a plaque on it. That plaque contains a Lafayette quote, "The welfare of America is closely bound up with the welfare of all mankind," unquote. In Rochester, Lafayette was greeted by two men from Geneva who had come to Rochester to journey with Lafayette all the way back to Geneva. One of these men was that James Reese, who had requested that Lafayette change his travel plans to come to Geneva on his way to Syracuse. The other from Geneva was Monsieur Camus, who in March of 1825 had opened a French language school in Geneva after presenting a personal letter of recommendation from Lafayette himself. June 8th, the day leaving Rochester to get to Syracuse, was a hot day. The temperature was at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit by 8 a.m. Remember that roads at that time were just crude dirt roads, so it must have been very dusty travel in the hot sun of that day. Lafayette's secretary, Auguste Levasseur, wrote about the Finger Lakes in his book and had this to say about Lafayette. Lafayette, according to Levasseur, this route succeeded in convincing us that no part of America, and perhaps the entire world, contains as many wonders of nature as the state of New York. Lakes Canandaigua, Seneca, and Cayuga appeared charming to us in the purity of their waters, the shape of their basins, and the fertility of their shores. The sight of all these beautiful things, and more still the kindness and the charm of the people who we met, often made General Lafayette regret the necessity of traveling so rapidly that day. I haven't been able to find any documented news about what reception, if any, there was for Lafayette in Canandaigua. Very possibly because of the distance that he had to travel that day, there was no real reception in Canandaigua. From Canandaigua, Lafayette journeyed east on the Seneca Turnpike, our present-day US 20 and New York 5. Traveling from Canandaigua to the Ball Tavern in present-day Flint, New York. It was at Ball Tavern, which in recent years was an antique store. It was there at the Ball Tavern the Lafayette party were welcomed by the entourage from Geneva that would escort the Lafayette travel group to Geneva. Shown here is the so-called Lafayette carriage, which is owned by Historic Geneva, formerly the Geneva Historical Society. For many years, this carriage was said to have been the carriage that in 1825, while on his triumphal tour of the United States, on June 8th, Lafayette rode from Ball Tavern on the Canandaigua Turnpike to Geneva for the reception for him there. The story went on to say that Lafayette found this carriage so comfortable that he requested its use for his trip the rest of that day all the way to Syracuse, where he then continued his journey east on the new Erie Canal. but the story is not believed to be true anymore. What is true, however, is that the carriage was built by Henry Brewster in New York City circa 1824 and belonged to William S. Dzing of Geneva, so it's of the style of the time period. For many years, this carriage was prominently displayed in the carriage house at Rose Hill Mansion. In recent years, however, it has been in storage. As what we know as Beans Hill, just west of Geneva, it is said that the Lafayette travel party stopped to rest very briefly under this balsam tree. In 1820, an elegant new home shown in the background was built just north of the tree, and that later building was the Lafayette Inn restaurant. The restaurant was destroyed by fire in 1975. Today, that site has a very recently constructed drive-through car wash, but before that, it was the site of the Ponderosa restaurant. It was at this site that Lafayette had his first glimpse of magnificent Seneca Lake. A signal gun's firing announced Lafayette's arrival there at Beans Hill. Nearly a dozen military companies marched to the tree, the light infantry and artillery troops all being in full uniform. It is believed that as many as 2,000 people greeted Lafayette. After this brief stop there, the Lafayette party traveled to Pulteney Park. Lafayette spoke briefly there and then dined with approximately 200 distinguished citizens at the new Franklin House. The Lafayette travel party left Geneva at 1 p.m., headed to Waterloo. On the journey from Geneva to Waterloo, the Lafayette travel party was escorted by a company of Waterloo cavalrymen under the command of Captain Lemuel W. Ruggles, as well as many Seneca County residents who joined in on horseback or in carriages. Lafayette arrived in Waterloo Village shortly before 2 p.m. The welcoming ceremonies were held at the Waterloo House, which was located on the northeast corner of Main and Park Streets at the public square. Today, the site of the former Waterloo Hotel is the Kojanung Funeral Home. Ceremonies were held at the Waterloo Hotel on the east side of the public square. One of the Revolutionary War veterans was the Reverend John Caton, whom Lafayette recognized his face and heard voice and called him by name, even though it had been almost 50 years since they had seen each other during our Revolutionary War. Of course, today we know the public square in Waterloo as Lafayette Park. The change in name came in 1922 at the request of the Waterloo Library and Historical Society that was making serious plans for the centennial of Lafayette's visit in 1825. Near the southeast corner of Lafayette Park stands this stone monument with the plaque. Lafayette's stop, however, in Waterloo was marked by a most unfortunate, sad tragedy. To announce the arrival of the Lafayette travel party on the west end of the village of Waterloo, a swivel cannon was to be touched off in the public square. The swivel was so loaded with a double charge of powder for this sounding that the men doing the loading of the swivel were afraid to put the burning match to it. a Captain Jehiel P. Parsons just happened to be passing by the swivel, so the men asked Captain Parsons to do the honor of putting the match to the swivel. And when he did, the swivel exploded. A fragment struck Parsons, and Parsons was killed. General Lafayette did not learn about this tragedy until he reached Auburn. Lafayette then asked Mr. G.A. Gamage of Auburn to investigate the matter and make a full report to Lafayette. Gamage went to Waterloo, interviewed Captain Parsons' mother, and sisters. Gamage reported later to Lafayette that Captain Parsons' tragic death left his mother, 3 sisters, and a brother without any financial support. On July 20th, 1825, from Philadelphia, General Lafayette sent a letter to the mother of Captain Parsons, expressing his sympathy and also with the equivalent of $1,000 American. From Waterloo, the Lafayette travel party, way behind schedule, traveled through Seneca Falls and crossed Cayuga Lake on the Cayuga Long Bridge and got to Auburn. The group was supposed to be in Auburn about 10 a.m. or so, but the stops in Canandaigua, Geneva, Waterloo, Seneca Falls, it was 4 p.m. when the Auburn welcoming group welcomed General Lafayette at the east end of the Cayuga Bridge. When the Lafayette travel party arrived in Auburn, there was the usual huge welcoming festivities of uniformed soldiers, as well as hundreds of area residents, and 24 cannons announced Lafayette's arrival. Part of the welcoming committee was William H. Seward, shown lower right, a young man only married 2 years at this point. The festivities in Auburn included a dinner for 200 invited guests and then a ball that lasted until 11 p.m. Following the ball, the Lafayette travel party journeyed through the night to Skaneateles, Marcellus, and down Onondaga Hill into Syracuse, arriving in Syracuse about 6 a.m. in the early morning of June 9th. The Syracuse committee had prepared an extensive dinner meal for Lafayette, who was supposed to have arrived in Syracuse by 6 p.m. the preceding evening. Although Lafayette and his travel party must have been thoroughly exhausted at that point, Lafayette remarked that the dinner food would make for a good breakfast, which they then proceeded to partake. From Syracuse, leaving at 9 a.m., the Lafayette group would travel east on the Erie Canal to Albany and then on to Boston. And that boat travel must have provided some badly needed rest for Lafayette. Almost any part of the United States that you go to can find a county, a city, a street, a park, a school, a shop or restaurant named for Gilbert du Motier, Marquis de Lafayette. He is clearly the most beloved French hero of the American Revolution. General Lafayette earned his place in the hearts of Americans because he symbolized the inherent principles upon which this country was founded, an unshakable belief that the democratic cause and liberty was important, was crucially important. He was an educated intellectual and also a soldier willing to shed blood for our Continental Army. He was a favorite among the founding parties, yet he connected with Americans from all walks of life, including black slaves. Above all, Lafayette was fully dedicated to democracy. This commitment to liberty fueled Americans' love for Lafayette and had them flocking to see him every time and every place that the Marquis, when he returned to American soil, would visit. There is an organization called the American Friends of Lafayette that is a historic and patriotic society devoted to the memory of Major General Gable Motier, the Marquis Lafayette, and to the study of his life and his times in America and France. I have been working with the Lafayette Trail Incorporated and its president, shown here, Julian Ishe. Mr. Ishe is only 28 years old. This Lafayette Trail Incorporated organization has been erecting markers like what is shown at bottom right to mark sites on the route that General Lafayette took in 1824 and 1825 in his tour of the then 24 states of the United States. These new markers, and there currently are over 90, are part of the plans already taking place for the celebration of the bicentennial of Lafayette's farewell tour of the United States. This is a view of the new marker that will be in Lafayette Park in Waterloo, New York. There will be a public dedication on Wednesday, June 8th, 2022 at 3 p.m. This will be the 197th anniversary of the actual day, June 8th, that Lafayette stopped in Waterloo, and Lafayette's arrival was marked by the tragic death of Captain Jahil Parsons when the swivel exploded. It will be a continuing reminder of the triumphal farewell visit of General Lafayette through our Finger Lakes on June 8, 1825. That farewell tour of General Lafayette is another piece of our Finger Lakes history.